Hello again, lovely to see you. This week I wanted to talk about my progression with my trauma issues. I think most of us have some degree of trauma in our lives, so I've just made a little bit of a breakthrough this week, which I would like to share with you. Um, Trauma can happen at any time in our lives, over long periods, short periods, stemming right back to childhood. I think most of us experience trauma of some kind in our childhood. And my way of dealing with trauma, I think, really came about or shows itself as control, trying to control situations, and also reading situations, like preempting. It developed in me quite a good level of intuition, I think, which is the good side of trauma, what it can develop in us. And I spent most of my life trying to read situations. And I'll give you a little example of how trauma um, showed itself in a story I can tell you about in my childhood. Although I was probably in my teens, I think, late teens at the time. The family group of us were fishing and in a coastal area where um, it used to be an old meat processing works, but it was all long gone and there was just remnants of it around. And it provided a really great place to fish in the local harbour because there was kind of a concrete area where boats initially had picked up the processed meats. And on this particular occasion, we were all aware of these holes. They were square, deep holes in an old rusty metal structure. I don't know what part of the building it was, but the grass sort of grew around it. And while we were fishing, we had to be constantly aware of not falling into these holes. There was a couple of them there. Anyway, you'd throw your line out and then back up. And of course, needless to say, as the day went by, I fell in one of these holes as I backed up after throwing my line in. Now, there's two sides to this story. There's the side where my uncle and brother were sitting, leaning against one of the concrete walls, entertaining themselves during the day, and obviously watching me all the time for the inevitable to happen. And they thought it was a huge joke when I fell in this hole. And that's their part of the story, and that is the normal. That's being normal, just sitting there enjoying themselves and watching how things unfolded. Now, for the traumatized child, falling in that hole was a completely different scenario because they weren't aware of my control issues with myself, and the fact that while I was in this hole and with only my head sticking out, it was up to my shoulders deep. This was a rusty old box, and I could hear the waves coming in and out underneath. And in my controlling way of intuition, trying to stifle the fear, because I could hear the sound of the waves, and I'm standing on rusty metal, which has just taken the full burden of my weight falling with gravity. And I'm thinking to myself, this is going to give way and I'm going to fall into the sea and no one will get me. I'm trapped under this building, this old building, and this is all going through my mind. And I am panicking. And I'm yelling out to them to help me. But they just think it's funny. They think that I've just fallen in a hole and I'm too short to get out. But unbeknownst to them, this traumatic experience is going on. Now, that's just an example of how we all go through life looking at a situation from 2 points of view. And if you don't realize that it's a traumatic experience for the person, you're oblivious to what's going on in their mind. because a traumatized person can look like anyone else going through going about their normal day, but underneath there's a turmoil going on and constant fear. And that's what you do. You're led by the nose, feeling that you're in constant fear that something awful is going to happen every moment of the day. And you are trying desperately to preempt all that and stop it before it happens. And that's where this control comes, where you're trying to control your surroundings constantly. So recently I have come across a few different places where this information has come through to me, and it's about what they call the observer, and that there's like two entities within us. And I think you'll probably relate if you start to think about it. I'm trying to think of an example. I can only think of like that this observer is like our director in a movie, and we are the character or the actor. Now, most of the time, we're working to a kind of internal script that's, that's our character, the person that we've developed through all the different scenarios in our lives. We become this person carrying out a script. We have a goal. We are conditioned as children to work hard in school, get a job, get married, have family, provide a roof over their head for that family, and move along through life and live happily ever after. That's the general format that we're fed, and we just plod along with that. Now the observer, this director, I'm trying to think of how best to describe it really, because it's something that if you can do it just for a moment, just take a minute and think about that internal voice, that entity that is fundamentally us. And it's the one that gives you the ideas, that you'll be prompted to listen to occasionally. And it's very difficult for me to describe, but if you take a minute and try it, you'll find that there is another entity inside us. I don't know who or what it is, but I can only describe it best as the director of our lives. So as we go through life, we tend to be mostly in the actor's mode, shall we say. Now, when you're stressed and you're fretting or you're fearful, or there's something that's really causing you major problems, if you're able, and this is the hard part, if you're able to just stop, just remind yourself that the observer is there, and call on the observer to observe the situation. Now, I've done this a few times. I've caught myself getting into my usual stress, panicking, rushing around, which is another thing I do, the Groucho Marx scenario. But if you can address the observer and say, observe this, you feel a change. And now, when you're in the observer's mode, you're very calm, very quiet. Everything is so much more clear. The clarity is amazing as you just see it for what it is. And I suppose in a sense it's like the actor when he's stumbling with the script, can't get hold of the character, doesn't know what's going on, getting lost. He'll ask the director for instructions, and the director will advise him accordingly. And that's what I've been finding in the last week especially, is that if I'm having some sort of problem, I'll immediately step back And I suppose some people could say it's God, spirit, whatever. I don't know, because it's like, I can only imagine it is part of God. That, but we're still us. We are still, dare I say it, we are God. And therefore, when you say to the observer, you know, look at the situation, there's no division. We are one and the same, but it's like two parts of one. And if you're able to call on the observer every time you get into a sticky situation, or even if you want some clarity, you want some advice, some key information that will make your life better, that observer is there and is you. And I suspect it's what we essentially are. We have to take very good care of ourselves and be gentle most of all, because we are here, I think, to learn. There's got to be some reason for us to be here, and learning is a great, great thing to do, and to experience life and find things that give us joy most of all. I think the bad parts make us grow as well, but they have to be salt and pepper. A little bit of this and a little bit of that. We don't want too much drama. But yes, if you're suffering in any way, have a little look at that. Being in the observer, find it, because it's there, and it's only waiting to be addressed. To be honest, I think it's always been there, but I never had a name for it. And this week has been very promising, I might add. I've been able to just slow down time, if you like, by saying, observe this. And then I step back into the observer's role and observe what's going on around me, and the clarity is wonderful. And like I said, it slows down and I'm able to see things far more clearly, and then can react accordingly. So I'll leave you with that thought, and I wish you all the best, and hope that you'll join me next time. And until then, bye for now.